relationship of its own, that you'd seek to negotiate protections, clarifications or exemptions where necessary in order to deliver on your ambitious economic programme. So to sum up, you want all the good bits of the single market and none of the allegedly bad bits, which I think the EU calls cherry picking, and they've rejected.
Well, no, I think there are certain provisions that we know undermine our workers' rights. For example, the Swedish derogation, the posted workers directives, is not in the interest of workers here in Britain, and we would want to seek that exemption. We know that a number of EU countries are currently pressing for it to be removed, and if it isn't removed, we will be pushing ahead with that. But ultimately, the message that Jeremy put forward today was that we have domestic economic problems, deep structural problems within our economy that need to be addressed. We've had significant underinvestment in particular regions over the last 7 years, and people are increasingly making their voice heard that they're not happy with this economic model. Now, we can put in place domestic interventions, and we've said that we'll do that. We're undertaking the most radical and robust industrial programme that's seen a generation in terms of investing in our infrastructure, our skills, our research and development, for example. But that will only work if we have a solid relationship with the EU that supports and complements our industrial strategy and our economic programme going forward.
Right, so what evidence do you have that the EU would agree to all of that? I mean, this really is, as you said once, having your cake and eating it. We want to maintain the benefits that we currently have within the customs union. We want to have our cake and eat it, as do most parties in Westminster. So where's the evidence that the EU would agree to that whole long list of the domestic policies you want to enact while still retaining all the benefits of the customs union and the single market?
Well, look, we've been clear from the start that people didn't vote to leave the European Union in order to have worse terms and conditions, to have lower rates of pay. We're always going to fight for a Brexit that puts our economy, jobs and businesses first, and that's what we set out to do. Now, we know that we're in a strong negotiating position with the EU. We're one of their strongest partners. We're the 6th richest economy in the world. Why would they not want to negotiate a bespoke deal with us in the same way that they've negotiated bespoke deals with other countries around Europe?
So do you think then that the government has an equally strong hand when negotiating its position on the basis that you've just outlined?
Well, the government doesn't have a strong position at all. They can't decide what they're doing from one week to the next. I mean, even in terms of the transition period, for example, they can't agree whether we're going to have existing terms or whether we're going to negotiate a transition period. And we've been quite clear today. So, for example, in relation to the transition period, we'll observe the current terms and conditions of the customs union and the single market so that we're not pushing businesses and workers off a cliff edge, and they're not having to undertake a new set of rules and regulations and then have to do it again once the final deal is reached. We want to provide certainty, and we know that that is not what this government is doing at the moment.
But you still haven't been able to tell us
long-term investment decisions.
Right, you still haven't been able to. You still haven't been able to tell us why your position would be any stronger than the government's. There was a plan that came out of the Chequers meeting with 4 points that then Donald Tusk from the European Union Council rejected as cherry-picking. You're saying that by remaining part of a customs union, that our trade policy will be dictated by the EU 27. Do you accept that?
Sorry, say that again. I didn't hear that.
Do you accept that our trade policy will be dictated by the EU 27 if the UK is part of a customs union with the...
No, and we've been very clear on that today. What we're seeking to achieve is to become part of a customs union with the EU, but that will be dependent on there being a clear forum in which Britain has a very, very strong position in agreeing to or amending any trade deals itself.
But what's your evidence that the EU would sign up? But there's no evidence, Rebecca Long-Bailey, that the EU would sign up to those exemptions, clarifications and protections that you talk about.
Well, we're in a very strong position for the reasons that I set out earlier. We're one of the biggest economies in the world. The EU wants to have a positive relationship with us as we want to have a positive relationship with them. And we know that we are only going to work as an economy and a European economy as a whole if we forge that strong relationship together.
Right, but you've just said that the British government hasn't got a clear direction, although it's stated what it wants to do in terms of leaving the customs union. Well, except they've said they want to leave the customs union and the...
Other.
Right, but they've said they want to leave the customs union and the single market, which is pretty clear. And even some of the things that they would like to see done in a bespoke deal have been rejected by the EU. So I say to you again, you say you're in a strong position, but there's no evidence for that strong position. Why do you but hang on, why do you think you can have the same relationship as Britain currently has now, but somehow give the UK a voice that's more influential than each of the EU 27, that we'd be able to influence EU trade policy more than them?
Well, we're taking a reasonable and pragmatic view of our future relationship with the EU. The government has not been reasonable and pragmatic. They say they want to have frictionless trade. They say they don't want a hard border in Northern Ireland, and yet they refuse to accept that we must have some form of customs union with the European Union. We realise that we can't have that frictionless trade without some form of a customs union, and that's what we're taking to the negotiating table. But we also want to be perfectly clear that we're not going to be a passive recipient in that arrangement. We want there to be a forum, a clear forum where Britain has the opportunity to argue and fight for its future trade deals on appropriate terms that are in the benefit of our own economic interests.
Isn't this just the first step of you ratting, as your colleague Frank Field said, on all those Labour levers? They voted to take back control of the money, of borders and of laws, and you'd sell them down the river to get Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street.
No. This is about taking back control and ensuring that we have full economic control. But to do that,
well, you can't if you're part of a customs union.
No, we have to make sure that we have a positive relationship with the EU in order to do that. We can't sell out our industrial base. We can't make people worse off than they are now on leaving the European Union. We have to find a relationship that satisfies our desire to leave the European Union, but also make sure that we can maintain those positive trading relationships and other relationships within the European Union. That's what we've set out today.
Will you back Anna Soubry's amendment to enable the UK to stay in a customs union and potentially defeat the government?
Well, we'll take that decision throughout the course of this week based on what the government comes back with. It'll be interesting to see what interventions they make today. As we know, they're at war with each other on the issue of the customs union, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some movement on that very point. Let's hope so anyway.
And on immigration,